The Home Office's controversial policy of housing asylum seekers on a barge has been delayed once again. Now, it had been thought the delay, so that it's the Bibby Stockholm barge, receiving its first 50 occupants today, were due to some fire safety concerns. But some breaking news in the last few minutes. We're now understanding that the delay is because working practices for port workers haven't yet been signed off by the UK Health and Safety Executive. Well, the first occupants are now expected next week, but approval from the fire department is still pending, so potentially a couple of issues at play here, and the barge is empty. Well, the Prime Minister responded to those fire safety concerns this afternoon and said all migrant accommodation has to go through a series of checks and inspections to make sure it complies with regulation. That's what's happening in this case. But let's take a step back. This is ultimately about fairness. I don't think it's fair that the British taxpayers are forking out £6 million a day to house illegal migrants in hotels. I want to put an end to that. Well, let's get the very latest. Joining me now, just in touching distance of the Bibby Stockholm barge in Portland, is TalkTV's correspondent Oliver Whitfield-Murchich. Oliver, a very good evening to you. So just explain a development. They're not moving on today, but next week potentially.
Yeah, so this will mean that this scheme has now been delayed by 2 weeks in total, because 2 weeks ago we heard from the Home Office. They said at that point that in the next 7 days we could expect to see migrants on board. That didn't happen. Then we were expecting them today, but because of all of the reporting by the Times newspaper, which has uncovered these fire safety concerns, plus these new details that are coming out about the port staff, we're now hearing that the latest that we're going to get people on will be next week. There's also a report this evening in the Independent that there could be further delays, potentially caused by lawyers who are now objecting to the transfer of migrants who've received paperwork to say that they'll be moving on to the Bibby Stockholm, and that then could cause even further delays if it goes through the courts. So quite a long wait for the government in what has already been a scheme that has been set back by a lot of setbacks.
Yeah, you're talking there, Ola, about the sort of issues with the actual vessel itself, but the wider picture of that has been so controversial. The local community there have said, we're really unhappy this is going ahead at all.
Yeah, they feel like this has been imposed on them. There's been no consultation. They haven't had their say. The main concerns from the local community is that the 500 plus men who will be housed on board the barge will be allowed to leave and come and go as they please. They are concerned, especially after they've seen similar reports about migrants in Dover that came walking through people's private properties, through their gardens. And so they are concerned from a safety element. There are, though, and it's a minority, I've got to say, Rosie, but there is a group here who are planning to hand out welcome packs to migrants as they get here, which will include phone lines in case they need to get in touch with somebody and information about the local area. So split opinions, but on the whole, I'd say there is more of a majority opposing the Bibby Stockholm being here than are in favour of it.
Yeah. Oliver, it looks like then, in a week's time, if those other proposed delays don't come to fruition, people will be able to move on board. Just give us a bit of an idea of what it's actually like, what the rooms are like, what day-to-day life's going to look like.
So there's 222 rooms on board. According to sources that we spoke to in Cornwall who were retrofitting the barge, it's had brand new air conditioning put in, televisions in every room. There is a billiards table. There's an area outside where people can get some fresh air. It's those two sort of holes that you see in the middle of the boat. There's a prayer room inside. We think that there's going to be around 2 to 6 migrants per every room. So in total, around those 500 people who will be moving on board. Then there'll be a shuttle service to take them into Weymouth, which is the next biggest town to where we are currently. The way it's being described to us is these aren't at all the worst conditions that have ever been seen, but there are those concerns about fire safety, about what would happen in the event of an evacuation, and everything to do with that.
Oliver, thank you so much. Live in Dorset for us here, TalkTV's correspondent. I guess there's kind of two issues at play here. One, sort of practicalities of the legislation of moving people on board that specific vessel. And then the second part is the controversy around the policy itself. Well, let's discuss both of those issues. Nick de Bois is still with me. I'm also joined by the immigration lawyer, Ivon Sampson. Ivon, good evening. Let's start with you. the Prime Minister was talking about fairness and saying it's not fair for the British public to spend so much money on putting people up in hotels. Is it fair to put people on that boat instead?
Well, the only time we've housed people on boats like this has been prisoners. Previous to this, no asylum seekers prior to this new Bibby Stockholm barge has been housed in floating vessels. Now, look, we don't know what it's like. We've got a description from your journalist, but really the Home Office needs to show us what it's like, and I think they're entitled. The lawyer's entitled to see whether they're adequate. Now, what it sounds that they're quite nice, but if you look at the history of asylum seekers in detention, there have been previous occasions where detention centres have been set alight. It happened in Harmondsworth a few years ago. And I can understand the government's concerns that if there is a risk of that all the proper safety certificates, the fire regulation certificates are in place. Yeah. And I can understand that.
They've got to go through the process, Nick. It's taking far longer than the government wanted to.
Well, you've got a Home Office that can't do logistics. I mean, there's the only explanation for it. If you're going to do something like this, you should have everything planned out. You know what your approvals you're going to need. So I'm sorry, the civil servants that are working on this, you know, they need to take a long, hard look at how inefficient they've been. That is clearly what's causing this delay. It's quite clear. You know what certificates you're going to need. You line it up before you give a date out when you're going to go in. My general sense about this whole thing, though, is that we're all talking about the wrong thing. Of course, this is what's in the news, but all we are doing is coming up with just another way to move asylum seekers from one accommodation to another. We're not addressing the issue of actually how are we going to stop 45,000 people coming in illegally, which kind of would have some impact on this. That is half of the asylum seekers that come into this country. Many come over in the small boats. They're the issues that we need to be tackling about, and yet we are dominating and making great sweeping statements about what is a couple of days' worth of people housing for a couple of days people who may come over in boats.
I think that the other issues are, how do you stop people coming over who shouldn't be here? How do you actually give a warm welcome to the people who do have a right to have asylum here and to work and contribute to the economy and be part of society? Ivan, from your perspective, the process of actually claiming asylum, how should it work in practice? And the system the government have put in place now, does that look anything like the system that should be there? No,
and they did have an efficient system before this current government came into power.
OK, what was that?
Well, they had properly trained people, the number of people that are recruited, properly trained presenting officers for the appeals. And look, I go quite often to court where there's nobody from the Home Office on the other side. You see refusal letters using templates with the wrong name, wrong nationality, errors, strewn with errors. You mentioned they're illegal. Let's get the language correct. Asylum seekers coming across the channel are not illegal migrants.
But they will be soon.
Well, you say that, but the law as it stands, and I think that's open to challenge, they're not illegal. Let's be quite clear. The only way you can claim asylum under the convention is to physically be in the UK. How do they get here? If people are fleeing from desperate situations, they will do whatever they can to get across to the UK. Yeah. And let me just finish. We take a fraction of asylum seekers of other European countries. We're 17th on the list. There isn't an asylum problem.
It seems there definitely is a problem at the pace at which we're processing people's claims, because
Indeed.
that's why you've got people...
Indeed. There's a bottleneck. There's 70,000 people.
How do you fix the bottleneck?
Well, you need to have properly trained decision makers. You need more staff doing that. You need a proper department that deals with appeals. Do you know half of the refusals win on appeal? That must tell you that take the grant rate of Syria, Eritrea, Iran, Afghanistan. The majority of them are granted asylum. There should be a fast track for all of those.
Look, it wasn't all glory before the Conservatives came into power. I can tell you by the casework I inherited in my constituents, and in 2004 there were 85,000 unprocessed claims in the UK, and the government lost 20,000 files. So it wasn't perfect, but the wider point you make, I accept. But look, there are points of entry in here for people to come into this country. What we're talking about here is what has captured people's concerns is the idea of about 45,000 people a year coming across, illegally entering this country. Whatever you may say, that is what they are doing when they come across on the boats. And the government are trying to stop that with their new bill, which basically says you will not be able to claim asylum if you come into
the
this
legal
country.
migration bill,
Yes,
teamed with the Rwanda plan and these barges.
That's right. And
they think that's going to be a sufficient deterrent. Is there an argument that says we stop focusing on deterring people and we just channel that money that we're spending on all these different solutions into more effective processing?
Well, well, I think you've got to be careful, because I don't think it's either or, actually, because if you have a system that is effectively opened up and says, come here and claim, and we've got a really efficient way of either turning you down or not, I don't think that's going to help the problem at all. So I do think actually trying to address the reasons of why there's the attraction to come here, notwithstanding those that have come from very difficult circumstances. But you're not actually recognising, I don't think, the 500,000 people who have been able to come into this country as refugees through legal systems, through Syria, where we had 20,000, through Afghanistan, 20,000, Ukraine, nearly 200,000. And, of course, there are other asylum applications that get accepted. It's not as if this country is not doing nothing. What people are saying is the system is broken on managing it, and it's been, if you like, brought to our attention by the number of people landing on the boats.
And it's also how it lands with the public, that's been a major problem for the Prime Minister, which is why he promises to stop the boats, and so we see this slew of policy to try to do it. Ivon, I just want to sort of draw your attention. Steve's got in touch. He says, instant detention and then swift deportation is the only deterrent. That sort of analysis is what seems to be what the Prime Minister is catering to.
Well, look, the powers are there to remove people. We already have laws in place. Take Albania. We've got laws in place to remove people within 2 to 3 weeks. Why are we not exercising those rights? So the government is not using the law effectively because it hasn't got proper systems and people to do that.
Well, we've already read about systems that have been exposed where actually lawyers, nothing to do with present company, have been abusing the system and behaving quite badly in how to encourage people to manufacture claims to stay in this country. That's not a healthy situation, is it?
Where are the people looking at those applications, deciding that they don't have any merits and refusing them? Well, look, at the end of the day...
Is it really as simple of just personnel? Because if it was that straightforward, presumably they would have tried that.
The rate is low. I mean, of getting through cases, it is extremely low.
I mean, how are they deciding? Why is there a backlog? Why are there not decisions made on those countries which most of them will be granted asylum?
In the meantime, while there is this backlog, the barge has been the policy that the Prime Minister is pushing forward with. Adam says, considering they only have one barge floating around as a massive publicity stunt, I do not think this will deter people from arriving in the UK illegally. Do you think the PR around this is actually meaning it's difficult to engineer policy that will help?
Yes, look, even if you had life sentences for people who came across the channel, it's not going to deter anyone. These are desperate people.
And
the biggest pull factor, and first, they don't know what our laws are, first of all. You can have whatever laws you like here. Asylum seekers not even aware of what they are.
Sorry, the premise they're desperate people,
the biggest
all
pull
desperate
factor,
people, is just wrong.
Biggest pull
profoundly
factor
wrong.
is family. The reason people come to the UK, they have family here. That is the biggest, and we should allow people to sponsor family members and wider family members who are seeking asylum. Allow them to work, allow them to be accommodated by their family members, let them work and earn a living. We don't let them work. Why not?
We have to leave it there. I know this story is not going away, clearly, for the next week or so, and Oliver gave us the very latest on the very many delays that may still be ahead. But Ivon Sampson, for now, thank you very much, and Nick as well in the studio.